Welcome to episode 6 of the Manage to Win podcast. Today we have Kevin Eikenberry, the CEO of the Kevin Eikenberry Group and author of The Long Distance Leader. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm glad to be here with both of you, even though I can only see one of you.
Yes, you have me.
Yeah, well,
Jeff
I'm
Russell,
the man behind the curtain today.
Pay no attention.
Sorry. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
For those of you listening who do not know, you have to Google The Wizard of Oz on that one. Just saying.
Nice. I like starting with a Wizard of Oz reference at every podcast. Kevin, why did you write The Long Distance Leader?
Because the world needs it. Because we got more and more folks, Jeff, that are leading teams that aren't all down the hall, right? Or not all people that they see every day. And while some people have a totally remote team, and maybe that when you think remote leadership, you think of that, many folks have at least one person who's gone at least some of the time, which means you have a remote team. And so we wrote the book because more and more people are having to lead when not everyone's in the same place. And while leadership hasn't changed, the nuances that we have to take into account and the intentionality that we require to do this well has changed. And so we wrote the book to talk about those nuances, those differences, and those things that will make a difference.
What are some of the primary things that have changed? I mean, working in an office now compared to working remote, there's so many differences, but there's a lot of similarities as well. We can connect in so many different ways.
Well, right. But I mean, the reality is that we have no more, we don't have serendipitous conversations. You can't manage by wandering around because there's no one around to wander to. You can't, building trust is different. Building relationships is different. Collaborating is different. Communicating is different. Coaching is different. So there's lots of things that are different when you don't see the folks as regularly or at all. And we need to take those things into account if we're going to, because all those things still matter, right? Like those things didn't go away as needs, just that in order to meet those needs, in order to help people make sure that they are connected and for them to feel that they're an effective contributor to the team and for you to know what they're working on. So all the communication stuff, all of that still is required, some of which happened somewhat naturally before when they were down the hall. Like I have only one of my team members here today. Yesterday there were 3. Never are there all. But I have way more conversation with Marissa down the hall than anybody else. And unless it's intentional, right? I've talked with 3 other members of my team today. But in every case, I had to reach out. It didn't just happen because I was in the hallway, right?
Right. So when you say you spoke with 3 other members of your team or you've interacted with them, you're talking remotely, or are you in an office right now and you have people down?
I am in the office, but there's only one other person in the office right now. So all those other people I spoke with remotely. So there are 15 of us total, and only one person, not counting me. And because I travel, shouldn't be counted. There's only really one person that's here every day. There's another person that's here basically 3 days a week. And other than that, there are some other folks that are relatively local, but don't come in for a variety of reasons. And then the rest of my team is spread out. I'm in Indianapolis and I've got folks in South Carolina and Virginia and Texas and Nevada and Ohio. And so we're spread out. And so most folks I'm not seeing regularly.
Oh, wow. So you have...
Hey, Kevin.
Oh, go ahead, Dad.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm the man behind the curtain, remember?
Yes.
So you just can't see me stepping out of the curtain to ask the question. But so I'm curious, Kevin, have you ever in your work found a position that does not work as a remote role or works poorly or is more challenging?
Well, I'll answer slightly different. I think I'll answer the question without saying a specific role. There are some things, right? When we work remotely, we tend to become actually quite productive, depending on the nature of our work. We can become quite productive because we have fewer interruptions. I often say to people, if you've ever worked the week between Christmas and New Year's, people say, yeah, I get so much done. I say, why? Because there's no one there to interrupt me. I said, that's the remote worker every single day, right? So in terms of individual productivity, it can be extremely valuable. But where the challenges come in is in the areas of where there needs to be deep collaboration because there's, while we can use all sorts of tools, including the one we're all using right now, which is Zoom, and all sorts of other digital tools to collaborate, it's still never going to be quite the same as being in the same room. Maybe if we get to holograms someday, but for now anyway, it's not exactly the same. This is like the closest thing to being here between Jeff and I, but still not the same as if he was across the desk from me. And so jobs that require a tremendous amount of collaboration may not work as well, but lots of knowledge work is just fine, and lots of work where people will actually benefit from fewer overall interruptions. Productivity will actually go up.
Yeah, that makes sense completely, because if I have to be talking to somebody constantly, it's going to be difficult. Even with the tools that are available today, from constant chat, real-time chat to web interaction, I would much rather work with someone in an office right next to me if I have to collaborate on a project where we're constantly talking.
Absolutely. And so I buy airline tickets and send people and bring people in for certain things. And so while we work remotely, and while it is a way to work and a way to work successfully, it's not necessarily, that doesn't mean that we should never find ways to bring people together. And when we do bring people together, we need to be really clear and intentional that we make time for more than just the transactions of the work, right? But that people get the chance to build relationships and build trust, because those things will pay longer term dividends than just what we get from the interaction itself.
Right. And how long have you been working with a majority or remote team? Have you always had people working remote? Naturally, the tools haven't always been there as well as they are now.
Not always, but I would say, up to a long time ago, I had at least one person. But I would say, for a number of years, we've had a largely, or at least a partly, or now a largely remote team. Yeah.
And I like how you have a remote team, but also an office. It seems like the dual nature of working spaces really works well in other companies that I've seen. And sometimes people want to go full remote, or sometimes want to they unfortunately force everyone to work in the office, which can be a problem. And either one might not work the best, but having both available is a good balance.
Well, and we call that a hybrid team, right? And I'm going to sneeze.
Go ahead.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
God bless you.
Excuse me.
Round 2. All right. Let it out, man.
Okay. We call that a hybrid team.
Okay.
We have folks in and folks not in, right? And I do think that's right. We don't really have a big enough space for everyone to be here and work effectively if everyone were here, but we have a big enough space that several can, excuse me, to work on a project or this or that. If someone flies in, or 3 or 4 of the local people are here, like yesterday, working on something, we've got plenty of space for that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Do you fly everyone in for annual team meetings, or is it always?
Twice a year, we have the entire team together to do planning, to do strategy, to do collaboration. To the earlier question,
Yeah.
Twice a year we bring everyone. It used to be annually, now we do it twice a year, and everybody together. And there are other situations where many of us are together for one purpose or another, but twice a year, everybody. Yep.
Gotcha. And what tools do you use to keep your team engaged? Obviously, you use Zoom, right?
We use, pretty much name it. Because of our doing work with remote leaders in organizations, we are pretty much tool agnostic in terms of, we use WebEx, we use GoToMeeting, we use Adobe Connect. We don't use Adobe Connect ourselves, but we use it with clients all the time. We use Zoom, we use Slack, we have email, go right on down the list. And so we have a wide variety of tools that we use, and many other people do too. The big challenge is not, do you have tools? The big challenge is, are you using them well? And are you using them at the right times for the right things? And that's where most people fall flat. It's not that they don't have technology. It's that they're not using it well or using the right tools for the right situations.
So speak to that.
That's one of the questions.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I have for you, Kevin, is, one of the mistakes I made in my career for decades long ago, before I started looking for systems, was I wasn't systematic. And it seems like one of the big breakdowns or changes that you have in managing people remote or being managed remote is communication and the consistency of that, the quality of that. Do you pretty much teach people a system or cycle or rhythm of communications so that they're so it's more like working in the office, where people are informed on what each other is doing and getting the information they need to be able to do their work?
So I'll answer that on a couple of levels. First of all, in terms of our work, when we work with organizations, we definitely talk about being intentional about that and creating an intentional cadence with your folks. Exactly what it looks like depends on the nature of the work and the nature of the organization, the size of the team, and a bunch of other things. So we don't have like a one size fits all answer. Here's how you should do it. But we definitely work with people to help figure that out and to think that through. And having a rhythm, having a cadence is super important. And that starts with clear expectations with your team. So, I think that one of the foundational principles for leaders in general is to have clear expectations with your folks, and everyone will politely nod and say, yeah, that's right, Kevin. And yet most people don't have, it's not very well done. But when it's remote, it's even more important, because now it's not just the expectations of the what needs to happen, but it's also the expectations of the how we're going to do it. How are we going to interact? How often are we going to interact? What are the things that we ask questions about or not? Who do we ask the questions of? And all of those things, part of that system or part of that set of expectations about how we're going to work. And then specifically, as it relates to tools, I think you've got to be really clear on when we're using which tools for which things, instead of just sort of letting it happen, which often what happens is people use the one they're comfortable with, which isn't necessarily the best tool for the job. Like they try to have a conversation over email, which we all know doesn't work, and yet people do it all the time. Wrong tool, right? Pick up the phone, turn on the webcam, and have a conversation. I had a conversation with a client this morning where we had started to talk on email, and I just said, hey, we'll be better off if we can have a 5-minute phone call, which we did, and which we were, right? And so the right tool for the right job. Even when we added Slack, which is the instant messaging tool that we use, we sat down and talked about, when do we use it versus when do we use email? And how will we use it? And what are sort of our ground rules and expectations about how we're going to use this tool? And until we did that, we didn't have the kind of success. There was always sort of a tension. There was always where's that information at? Who's people are using the thing they like to use? But once we set some parameters, once we set some expectations, then we got a chance to have it really work.
I'm curious, what were those parameters? What were those expectations?
You're asking me to go back a long way, Jeff. But I'll say a few things. Like we talked about, when are we going to use this versus when are we going to use email, and where and how are we going to use? Are we going to send attachments through Slack? Or not? Are we going to send people the link to where it is as a Google Doc, or where it is in our drives? And so we just try to talk and set some agreements around how we are going to do it. And we didn't do it before we started, because before we started, we didn't know, right? So we gave it a couple of months of using it. And then when we were all together, we said, okay, what's working here? What's not working here? Let's set some parameters around this and how we're going to actually use it. And so we set parameters around when to use which, and certain kinds of communication always happen in Slack, as an example. And as in many of the other tools now, like Microsoft Team and other tools like that, many of them have the ability to have a channel, right? Where not everyone is it's not just direct to one person, but you can have a channel with groups. And one of the things that I would recommend to people to do in that regard, and it's in this idea, Jeff, is that you ought to have what we have is what we call a water cooler channel. So the water, and I would show you what was in it, except I just closed it for this so stuff wouldn't pop up on me. But the water cooler channel is the kind of stuff we would talk about in the hallway. It's not about work. It's about everything else. It's about people razzing people about the ball game. It's about letting people know what happened with their kid last night. It's sharing the funny picture. It's all that stuff. And so that all still happens. So we have an organic place for that to happen. People don't feel like, well, I can't share that, in Slack because this is supposed to be about business. So we have a place where all of that stuff can be, as well as having all the other channels for the business units and the projects and everything else. And it's made a huge difference for us.
That's awesome. I like having the rules for how the tools are supposed to be used. They can be, because they can be abused so easily, and people can invade your time. People can use it improperly or just in an inefficient manner. But they can also be really fun when you set the right parameters. I remember we used to use Google Chat, I believe it was. It was just a desktop client that we used, and everyone could have their own avatar, their own picture. And my boss happened to be a very short, bald Englishman with a very good sense of humor, and so he set his avatar as Yoda. And, and it was fantastic. And so it's super fun to talk to him, and you have Yoda pop up in your screen, and you can say, oh, Yoda wants to talk to me. Have you?
I thought you were going to say he was going to be Wilt Chamberlain or something. I didn't know where you.
Yeah, no, that would have been great too, right?
That would have also been equally good, right?
Yeah, yeah. Have you encountered any difficulties in transitioning? I imagine you work with a lot of clients that want to transition from working primarily in an office to working remotely. Have you encountered problems, people that don't want to do this?
That's one of so that's one of the reasons why people do engage with us often, right? Because they're experiencing that pain or anticipating that pain.
Yeah.
So there's certainly going to be people. There can be resistance from the people from three places, right? Well, maybe four, but for our purposes, three. There can be resistance from the people that you're sending home because they don't want to, because they don't know, because it's like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. They don't know what the unknown is, so they're scared of that. There's sometimes resistance from the people that aren't allowed to leave, who wish they could, and they often think the grass is greener for those people that are working at home, right? Mm-hmm. And there can be resistance from the leaders themselves. Like, I don't like, it's way better if I can see people. You're going to make them be in a different place. That's harder. I'm not sure I want that. Yeah. So the resistance can come from any of those places. And then it's like any other change conversation. We got to talk about the understanding the why and all the things to help people get past that and get through that. So resistance can come from any place, and I've seen it come from every place.
And some people struggle to work remotely. They struggle to be productive.
They struggle to be productive for a variety of reasons. I mean, the research says that in general, as we said earlier, that people are more productive. However, some people, because of their personality style, communication style, they're more extroverted. They need an outlet, and they don't necessarily have that. Sometimes people aren't able to build the routines to work successfully without the structure of coming to an office. And so those are some of the things that we help organizations with. Help say, how do we prepare people to be successful to work from home? Or once they are, how do we help them do that successfully? So while we sort of really started with how do we help the leaders, we're finding ourselves helping now both the leaders and the remote folks. And you're right, it isn't for everybody. But most people, once they have some help and some support and some clear expectations, can be much more successful. Or can be successful working remotely. It means people are going to have a personal preference, right? And they may say, hey, I still wish I could work from the office. I have one person on my team that I think she loves working from home. She loves the fact that she doesn't have to commute to all those other things. And yet I can tell on the days when she's here that she loves that too, right?
Yeah. Now, I know when a lot of this started, there were certain people that had to dress in their work clothes or something similar to get in that mindset and be productive. Do you find that that's less and less now, that has to happen, or is that still a need for some people?
I don't think that that's going to get less and less. I always go back to, and that's part of our advice is do what needs to work. You got to have your routines. You had a routine before. You got to still have routines. They might be different. And I'm not saying anyone has to wear this, that, or the next thing, but I always go back actually to a story that my grandmother used to tell me, who was an elementary school teacher for many years. And she used to say she always looked forward to dress-up days. And I asked her why once. She was because kids were better students, right? And there's something to be said. I think there's something psychological to that. I guess I don't really care if you want to wear your AC/DC t-shirt when you're working, as long as you're working effectively. So I think the mistake is for leaders to assume they must have a dress code if they're going to work from home. right? Or to assume that it really doesn't matter, because I think it's very personal in that regard. And I think what we should be doing is encouraging people to find what works best for them, fundamentally.
Do you encourage your clients to have a dress code for people that are working remotely?
I do not. I think, I'm not a big fan of that to start with, but what I am saying is I think you ought to talk about it, right? And I think that if there are lots of meetings where people are on their webcams, and if the people from home are in their AC/DC t-shirts and the people in the office are, dressed business casual or better, there could be perception issues, right or wrong, coming from the people on the cams looking at someone in their t-shirt, right? And so I think that conversation needs to take place. Whether they need to in order to be successful, I think it depends a lot on the organizational culture and the perception of what others are going to think if they see them, right, dressed in a way that might not be seen as professional. I just think it ought to be discussed fundamentally.
Well, and I think that kind of like what you've talked about before, it's got to be it can be a hybrid or a balance where, we really don't care what you're wearing when you're offline, but when you're going to be on a webcam, here's the dress code,
right? Or whatever it is, right? And, hello, all you can see me right now is from here up. You have no idea if I have on bunny slippers. I do not, but you don't know. And that part you don't care about in terms of.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah.
Right. And I have on pants, but at some level it wouldn't matter. Right. Now we're all happy. Now all of our listeners are happy to know that we're all fully clothed. But the point is, and in terms of if you're watching us, you can only see me from, my chest up. And so it really wouldn't matter beyond there. So I think that you're right. I think that if that is a cultural issue, or especially if you're leading folks that you're trying to help groom for future jobs, that you want to help them be successful, it might mean, hey, you know what? Run the brush through your hair. Might not be a bad idea, kind of thing. I don't care if you're not going to be on the cam, but if you are, it might be in your best interest, if you thought about that a little bit.
You're definitely making me think about it right now. I should have put on a polo shirt. Should have brushed my hair a little bit.
It's fine.
I like what you said about having a routine. That's definitely something I've noticed with my daily life and daily work. We all work remote, and I've actually been criticized by some friends, funny enough, for leaving some dishes in the sink the night before, because I found in the morning, I like to get up and have something to do. It helps me get going. It helps me, my brain and my motor skills start functioning. And if I have something to do, it feels good. So I leave the dishes in the sink. I do them in the morning and I'm ready to go. I'm like, okay, now I make breakfast, I eat, and then I get to work.
I'm glad that you said you actually do them in the morning. Otherwise I was going to say, this is all big. But no, but your point is a good one. Your point is whatever. And it doesn't have to be the same for everyone, right? You need to have one. You had one when you got up, did something, got in your car and went to the office. And so you ought to have one now, even if it's different, right? For some people, it's getting dressed. For some people, it's apparently doing their dishes from the night before. It doesn't matter what it is. One of the folks on my team is actually my co-author of the book, Wayne Trammell. He will send me a Slack message every morning. If I haven't sent him one, he sends me one. Good morning. What's going on? And that may be all there is, but he needs that as a part of his, he needs to feel connected, and it makes sure that he's not missing something. And, not everyone on my team does that, but I know that Wayne does. And if I don't get that from Wayne, it leaves me to wonder, is he okay? Is everything okay? Is there something going on? Right. So I think we all ought to have those routines. Include brushing your teeth, by the way, is one of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's in my routine too. I wanted to ask you about your past also, and now you obviously are very learned about remote work, and you teach and consult on that. Were you always a consultant, or what about your prior experience?
So, in short, I grew up on a farm, went to college, studied agriculture, ended up in working for a very large organization in sales and then in marketing, and then made my way there while I was at Chevron to work in training and development. And after that, I chose to leave Chevron to start a consulting company about 25 and a half years ago. And so we've been in the business of working I really began as a learning consulting organization, and I would still consider us to be a learning organization, learning consulting company, but we really focus almost entirely on things related to leadership now. And so whether that's remote or otherwise, so we do have the Remote Leadership Institute.com, and that's everything related to the remote piece, but we have much more that we do around that, including things for new supervisors, budtoboss.com, and the rest of our work at remarkableleadership.com, as well as our main site, kevineikenberry.com. So 25 plus years of doing this after working in corporate America for about 8 years. And so I've got a wide set of experiences working with clients over the last 25 years, pretty much any industry, and with people from most places around the world.
It sounds like you're really passionate about the teaching side of things.
We are in the business of helping leaders grow and develop. And so that means that there's a piece of that. And so pretty much everything we do is related to that, whether it's writing a book, shooting a podcast, being on a podcast like I'm being on right now, writing a blog, teaching in a classroom, doing coaching. And I will have done about 5 out of those 7 things today before the day's over. So,
wow. Just for our listeners, what's the name of your podcast?
It is the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, and you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to remarkablepodcast.com.
Awesome. I had a few more questions, but I do want to give time for David, because I know he's on the phone to ask questions. David, do you have anything? Dad?
No, I've been jumping in. You go ahead and go through your stuff, and I'll jump in as need be.
Okay, great. So, Kevin, I'm a big fan of a company called Basecamp. I don't know if you've heard of them. They offer a project management app, and they wrote a book called Remote.
They did.
And I was curious, did you read the book? What did you think about it?
I did. It's been a while. I've slept since I read it. It's been a while since I read it. But yeah, I think it's got a lot of solid stuff. I can't, it's on my shelf, on one of my shelves over here on the other side of the room. I can't quote you five things from it, but I can tell you that, yeah, it's a good book with good stuff in it, and they're smart. And I think, like us, they're doing it right, which I think makes it different, right? They're not just saying, well, you ought to try these things. They're living it every day. And I think anytime you can talk to someone who is a practitioner, you're going to get a different set of thoughts than just from someone who's a researcher or an academic or whatever. And again, no disrespect to anyone, but different perspectives, right? And so certainly the perspective that they bring is one of a practitioner.
Yeah, I agree with that. They seem to be authentic in what they teach. And that's definitely something that you seem to be as well. And one of the things they mentioned in the book was just about it was about real-time chat. Mm-hmm. I was just curious, just one thing I wanted to get your take on. How do you feel about real-time chat? Do you turn it off at times? Do you use it all the time? Is this something that's necessary?
It's a great question. So here's how it works for us. And that goes back to the rules that we set about how that works, right? It's just like if you were in the office, if you were someone today, I wish I'd left it open because I'd have just gone in and clicked something open and read it. So there's, first of all, yes, it's closed right now. All right. It's closed.
Yeah.
Number one, but we have everyone on our team will say, hey, off to a doctor's appointment, be back in an hour, right? Off to do something, available by phone only for a while. Now, obviously they might have that chat on their phone, but in other words, we're trying to let people know how they can reach us if they need to. And it's important in the kind of work that we do. Everyone might have a piece of work that requires their full thought. They shouldn't be multitasking. They really should be head down doing something, whether in my case, it might be writing something or designing something. Someone else on the team might be doing some sort of other project. And so everyone can say, hey, next 2 hours, whether it's on their calendar or through the chat tool, say, I'm not available for the next couple hours. If you really need me, here's how you get me. In other words, I want my people to be highly productive, and sometimes that means they shouldn't be interrupted. So the same thing as if you're in the office and you close your door. People don't come in if your door's closed, right? That's a clue to say that person's focused on something right now, and we need to have the same sorts of ways to do that with chat, and not just be always on 24/7 or even 8 to 5 or whatever. And so that's, again, back to the parameters that we tried to set for us right off the top.
Yeah, I found that I definitely need that. I need to shut out everything if I'm going to work intensely on something, especially we do a lot of writing here as well. And do you find that different people with different personalities can handle it a little bit better than some other people as far as the distractions?
Well, maybe, but the research all says that we can't multitask anyway. It's all an illusion. And so while some people, if I'm in a group and I'll say, who thinks they're a good multitasker? And about 30% of people will raise their hand. And the research says that some people may be slightly better than others. But the research also says that depending on the two tasks, about the best you can do at both is 70%. So I think I want my people working, or I want our team wants to be working at more than 70% effectiveness some of the time, right? So yes, there are probably some differences, some sort of quantitative differences in people's ability to do that, but most of it's in their head, and most of it's probably wrong when you get right down to it.
Right. Okay.
So one thing that comes up with oh, sorry, Jeff, go ahead if you want to ask a follow-on.
You're good. Go ahead.
Hey, one thing that comes up with clients is, how do I know my person is putting in a full day? So what do you do when you've got a problem there? You're not sure about the hours somebody is putting in, and that's important to you.
Well, there's two things. First of all, how do you know they're putting in a full day down the hall, except they didn't leave their desk? Like, there's a big, the real question shouldn't be about activity. It should be about accomplishment. Now, I know there are some jobs that people are being paid by the hour, but fundamentally, we should be focused on our people getting done what we need them to get done at the level of quality and safety and whatever other parameters that you have. And if the answer to that is yes, why do you care? Number one. And if for some reason that you do care, I think it's an illusion to think that you know that in the office and you don't know when they're somewhere else. And so if you really need some of those things, then think about building tools so that people have a way of keeping on task and staying focused and not getting diverted by 12 other things, right? So build process measures, tracking tools that everyone can see, or at least the needed people need to see about how they're doing, right? So I really do challenge most everybody to, now, if you get someone working remotely and they're taking customer service calls, for example, we need them in their seat because we need someone to have coverage, right? So I'm not talking about that. But for most jobs, what we really should care about is not activity, but accomplishment. And are they getting done what we've asked them to do or more at the level of quality and consistency, et cetera, that we need? And if the answer to that is yes, what do you care? I don't care, generally speaking, if my team members, when they do their work, as long as they do their work. What do I care if they take an hour in the afternoon and do something or go to a doctor's appointment, as long as the work gets done and as long as we are covered for anything we need if we need customer-facing activities. So people ask that a lot, and I think that it's a fear that is rooted in control. It is a fear that is often misapplied because we're focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah. If you have the metrics and you're measuring the metrics and those metrics, are valid, how they're being tracked. I agree with you. Not an issue, but it is something.
It's no doubt
that
something
comes
people
up.
worry about.
Yeah.
And people ask about all that.
Yeah.
It's not
Now,
the first time I've heard the question.
Yeah. No, I didn't think it would be. Now, another thing that comes up is, we teach a lot of soft skills in Dave's Charm School, and are you finding that when people move remote, that there's an increased need or the same need for soft skills training and some role playing or listening in on calls or whatever to make certain that people have the people skills that you need to keep the relationship strong, whether it's internally with the team or externally with clients or vendors, whoever?
Well, the need is certainly not going down. Right. You could argue that perhaps in some situations the need is actually heightened because we have to be more intentional about some of those things because we're not interacting people and seeing them face to face. But at a minimum, they've not gone, the importance of these skills has not gone down. And in some cases, as I said, probably gone up. And yeah, that's my answer. That, yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because
we didn't make the world easier for the world just because they're in their own house. In fact, it may make those skills even more important when they are together, because it's like this. Like if I interact with Marissa down the hall 6 times today, then I had 6 interactions with Marissa. I might have 1 with Wayne, just to use that as an example, right? So that means every one with Wayne has way more weight than each one of the 6 with Marissa, right? So like if I'm going to shoot 90% free throws and only take 10, I can only miss 1. If I shoot 100, I can miss 10, right? The point is that the number of interactions is reduced, and so the importance of each individual interaction goes up. So if I interact with people less frequently, I really need to be on my game. And that's not just for me as a boss with a team member, it's between the team members. So for those reasons, again, the need for those skills is at least as high as they were before.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's been our experience too. And when people are working remote, of course, like you brought up, you're missing seeing the body language. You're missing seeing the facial expressions, the other pieces of the puzzle that kind of go into it. You still have tone of voice, and that's where webcams can be helpful. But I don't think people are as, comfortable on webcams. Their behaviors aren't identical to, kind of the same way it is when you're face to face in the same room. Would you agree?
Well, Jeff reminded me before you got on that we had a conversation about this the last time we chatted about the whole webcam thing. And I didn't remember it, but until he reminded me. But I think that there are certainly people who are less comfortable with the webcam. There's no doubt. And we got to get them past it. That's the bottom line. We got to get them past it. People got to get over it. And they don't have to look at themselves. They can look at the other person. And it's one of those expectations of the job, right? Because it is the next best thing to being there. I had a chance on my podcast to interview Tom Peters, and I had a great conversation with Tom, who is the guy who, along with Bob Waterman, invented the phrase MBWA, managing by wandering around, right? And so he and I are on this, having this conversation, and I said, so, hey, when we're remote, managing by wandering around doesn't work so well. He said, what is it? Managing by frequent flyer miles? I said, nope. I said, it's leading by webcam. Like it's the next best, it's the best thing we got. We got to use it more than we do. And we got to help our teams get to the point where they're comfortable with it. And it's like anything else. If we're not comfortable with it, we get comfortable with it by using it.
Yeah. Are there any tools to use that you've come across with webcams besides a quality webcam and a good microphone? I mean, people use backgrounds, they use all sorts of things to make themselves look better.
Well, it's to make it look better, but it's also now, let's get very practical. You got some people who are, they're remotely working, but they're teleworking. They're working from home, right? And so one of the reasons that some people are reticent is their own appearance because they didn't take a shower or whatever, or they came from the gym. And another reticence is I don't really want people to see my dining room, or I don't want people, whatever. And so the tool that we have, some of our team members have and use, not necessarily for that reason, but it solves that problem, is something called a web around that you actually attach to the back of your chair, and it can be white or it can actually be green. So if you were doing something with a green screen, you could do that too. But what it does is it basically covers the area behind you, so that's clean, and you don't see what else might be going on behind there. Like right now, I don't really want you all to see my desk if I were to turn this webcam, because it's not really awesome, right? And so if I were working from home and I didn't want people to see that, then I need to set my camera away so they can't see that, or something like a web around. We've got someone on the team that has built a little drapey thing, but anything that will help people reduce their reticence or their concern with the getting on the webcam thing is worth helping them with.
That reminds me, like a year or two ago, I rarely rent a car anymore. I'm normally like going to a place and, I'm just taking an Uber, doing my work, walking to my hotel, really no big deal. But I had to rent a car. I went to Avis and I decided to try the kiosk, and it had a TV screen on it. And all of a sudden this, representative comes up on the screen, and they would have backgrounds, because I had to do this twice for some reason. And they were really phony backgrounds. They're really bad. It really did not come across well. It was really, I don't remember exactly what the background was, but I was like, wait a minute, that's not real. And the people weren't that comfortable, it was bad. It was really bad.
Well, and again, we don't know if where those people were in their training, right, to do that. But I would say if you're going to have people doing that level of the whole job is that, then I do think you'd probably want to do some sort of, a training around that to help people get comfortable. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Maybe a better background.
Giving better background, giving people some practice. I mean, now it's like the same thing that we've all, if you've ever been to any kind of presentation skills training worth its salt, you got videotaped and you got to watch it. And so, one of the ways I've gotten better at this is I do so many webinars and so much of that stuff that I've had the chance to see myself. So I have an idea of what it's going to look like and how far away I ought to sit and all of that sort of thing. Right. So, I think it's like any other skill. It's learnable. And so you might need to give people some time. You might need to give them some coaching. You might give them some feedback and perhaps some tools, to your point.
Yeah, and the flip side that you've touched on briefly that I think really needs to be emphasized to the leaders is, the benefits of having people work remotely are enormous. Lowers your cost with your office expenses. It gives them a lot of flexibility in their work hours at times if they don't have set work hours. Eliminates the commute. I mean, I've got people that I work with where their commute can be anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours each way.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's just
life-changing
insane,
stuff.
Right?
Yeah, it's life-changing stuff.
Yeah. It's like, Jeff works really hard, but, he's in Southern California now and surfs up. Hey, he doesn't have to be on a call. He's going to go surf and then he's going to make up the time in the evening. Am I right, Jeff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm working late at nights, early at mornings, and whenever the waves are good, whenever the swell's coming in, I'm heading out to surf at the right time and making up the time at other times. So it's definitely, the flexibility is a huge benefit.
Yeah. So the point, I think where you're headed is, the point is that we have to recognize that as leaders in organizations, that there are great benefits. I think the big overall point of our conversation is that we have to recognize that when we make those changes, that we will have to lead at least somewhat differently. We have to lead more intentionally. We have to lead more, be more clear about what we're doing. We have to create cadence and rhythm in ways that we maybe didn't think about having to do before. Systems and processes matter perhaps more in some cases than they did before. And so while it's still, as we say, leadership first, location second, there is location that we have to think about, and those nuances matter a lot. And if we leave that out and think we'll just keep leading the way we've always led, we're going to be disappointed with the results in many ways.
Yeah, and I would like to mention one thing from our clients before you go, Jeff, is that when you talk about these different, leading intentionally and different communication things, one of the big things that's happening cybersecurity wise right now, we work with tons of IT solution providers, service providers, is where somebody's hacking into somebody's computer system, and they're studying the way they do email, and then they're emailing instructions to a decision maker to send a wire out. And literally, we have had more than one of our clients have a client where they've given them instructions, they've given them rules and procedures, and their client has not followed those procedures. One client wired away $400,000. So those procedures and things are really important, in a lot of areas. One of them in particular is, since we're not in the same room, how do we avoid this type of situation? By the way, it's kind of funny. One of these situations came up where they were trained. Once again, we're not going to follow the process. And the CFO or the controller, whatever the guy was in the role, got an email, he thought, from the CEO that said to wire, I forget, it's $125,000 or something like that somewhere. looked all legit, and they work in the same office. And, he kind of saw the email, but he was busy with some stuff. And about an hour later, the CEO walks by and, stops in, chats for a moment. And he says, the finance guy says, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to send that wire in about 5 minutes." CEO goes, "What wire?"
Yeah.
And that was the only way they caught it, because they were not following process and procedure that had been laid out by their, IT service provider. So these process procedure, they're really important, the relational side, the productivity side, but also financially, security wise.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
It sounds like there's a little bit of work on the front end. If you're going to work remotely, if you're going to do that successfully and avoid these problems, you're not going to be in an office where those serendipitous communications, might happen. So setting yourself up for success is a really important part of this.
Agreed.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you one more thing about, you work with leaders a lot and helping them develop a remote workforce and do that successfully. How do you counsel them on coaching their employees how to work successfully in their remote locations and avoid distractions? So I definitely found that is a key, a big thing for my productivity.
Yeah, and I think that we've talked about it a little bit. And here's the thing I would say is you ought to be you ought to have clear expectations about some of those things, and you ought to give people the chance to. Here's what happens too often: we're going to make sure you got the right equipment. We're going to make sure you got a high-speed internet connection. We're going to make sure your laptop works at home, and go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. Right, as opposed to having real conversations with you about the things we've talked about today, like routines and what our expectations are and those sorts of things. So I think just coaching people and giving them a chance to think about how they're really going to work, talking with other people in the organization who are already doing it successfully, giving them that chance. We onboard people when they come to work. We ought to be thinking about onboarding people when they move to work from home, right? Or to work from a customer location, perhaps, right? Co-located. We ought to be onboarding them to all of that, as opposed to just, they're going to work from home now, and then they go. So there's work we ought to do on the front end. We've talked about that a lot. And then we ought to be continuing to coach them. Hey, how's it working? What else do you need? What are your concerns? How are you feeling about your productivity? I mean, now we're just into just coaching people, just like we would coach them about anything else. And again, whenever possible, when you're coaching, use the webcam so we get that. I mean, I do coaching with my team members on the phone sometimes. For the most part, try to do that where we've got a richer communication, which is, the closer we can get to face-to-face, the better.
And I think we're about ready to wrap this up. David, do you have any last thoughts?
Hey, my only last thought is it looks like my internet finally just came on, but I'm going to stay behind the curtain. So the timing is perfect, I guess. Anyway, no, I think it's great, Kevin. I love the work that you're doing. I love the way you're focused on training, developing leaders. And there is a whole nother component. Maybe I'm opening Pandora's box here, or maybe it doesn't apply at all. But I'm curious, have you done any work with youth as far as middle school, high school, maybe college then gets into some work stuff, but as far as their online usage, their device habits and productivity and how they work?
There's certainly a need for that, and from my perspective, and that has not been something that we've focused on at all. It just hasn't. But do I think there's opportunity there for coaching and guidance and processes? Absolutely, 100%. But that's not something that we've professionally gotten involved in at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Kevin,
Cool.
any final tips?
Well, I thank you.
Kevin, any final tips for leaders leading a remote organization?
I would just say it's been a pleasure to be with you guys. And people can go to longdistanceleaderbook.com and you can get a sample chapter. And there's lots and lots of free stuff there to help you if you're in this situation. And, you can go find me to follow me on LinkedIn or reach out to us, KevinEikenberry.com, KevinEikenberry.com. So it's been a pleasure to be with you all. And I would just say to you that leadership hasn't changed entirely, and yet we must take into account the remote nature of our teams and how that changes what we must do as we lead, as we help people make the choice to follow us.
Kevin Eikenberry, everyone. Thank you for being with us.